In August of 1973, on a 240-acre Stearns County dairy farm 6 miles east of the village of Richmond, Minnesota, a 24-year-old single woman named Erica Holtschuh walked into a hand-built oak breeding stall behind a 1912 white-painted dairy barn at 5:20 in the morning and fitted a hand-built oak halter her late father Reinhardt had fitted on him as a yearling, onto an 8-year-old registered Holstein Friesian herd sire named Big Wolfgang. Her grandfather Anselm's 1924 Wisconsin import line had bred to a 2,140-pound mature weight on the place. The August dawn was already warm, the kind of upper Mississippi Valley humidity that put a sheen on the cottonwood leaves down by the spring-fed creek that ran along the eastern fence line, and the cool of the barn aisle concrete pressed up through her black rubber knee-high dairy barn boots. She wore a faded chambray button-down shirt, buttoned to the throat under a pair of denim bib overalls Reinhardt had bought at the Coast to Coast Hardware in Richmond in the spring of 1971, dark cotton work stockings, and a faded blue cotton kerchief headscarf knotted under the chin. Her hands, weathered and young at once, showed a thin crescent of milk-soured cream along the inside of the right wrist, where the bucket milker hose had brushed her in the previous afternoon's milking. She was lean and strong and sturdy, fair-skinned in the way of the Stearns County German Catholic daughters, the skin already weathered along the cheekbones by sun and wind and the cold of the milkhouse in the small hours. Big Wolfgang turned his great black and white head toward her, lifted his nose to the familiar smell of her, and stepped quietly out of his loose box into the aisle. His coat carried the wide blaze down the front of the face, 2 white stockings on the offside legs, and on his left flank the distinctive heart-shaped black patch the children in the Holtschuh family had been pointing at since he was a knock-kneed calf in November of 1969. He weighed, by Reinhardt's last May 1973 weigh tape, 2,140 pounds. He moved like an animal who had never been hit. Erica's grandfather, Anselm Holtschuh, born in 1882 in the Eifel district of the Rhineland and buried in 1958 in the parish cemetery of Saints Peter and Paul, a mile west of Richmond, had bought the original 160 acres of this place in the autumn of 1916 for $5,200 cash, paid in $20 gold certificate notes laid on the kitchen table of the previous owner. 8 years later, in the spring of 1924, Anselm had ridden the Sioux Line Railroad east to Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and brought home a registered son of a Wisconsin sire called Burke Hill Inca Pride Royal in a Pullman stock car for $620, the foundation bull of every Holtschuh herd sire to follow. From that 1924 Wisconsin import, the Holtschuh herd sire line had run unbroken through Anselm's lifetime, through Reinhardt's lifetime, through the long winters of 2 world wars and the dust years of the early 1930s and the Korean draft years and the long, quiet decade of the 1960s. Reinhardt Holtschuh, 3rd-generation Stearns County Holstein dairyman, born in 1917 in the upstairs bedroom of the 1908 2-story white-clapboard farmhouse, and dead on July 14, 1973, at the age of 56, of a heart attack while loading second-cutting alfalfa hay onto a 1960 New Holland 268 baler wagon in the upper hayfield, had been the man who walked Big Wolfgang to the breeding stall 4 mornings a week from the time the bull was 18 months old. And now Reinhardt was 4 weeks in the parish cemetery beside Anselm, and the man's part of the work fell on the daughter, and the daughter was 24 years old. The story of how the Holstein place came to stand in 1973 as one of the last commercial dairies in Stearns County, still maintaining an on-farm herd sire, began on a September afternoon in 1916 when Anselm Holstein, then 34 years old and 7 years off the boat out of Bremen, drove a borrowed buggy 6 miles east of Richmond on what was then still called the Sauk Lake Wagon Road, and stood in a hayfield with a man named Schwartzentruber, who wanted out of the dairy business and wanted out that autumn. Anselm carried the $5,200 in a canvas bank bag inside his coat. The deed of sale was signed at Schwartzentruber's kitchen table at 4 in the afternoon and witnessed by the Stearns County Sheriff, and recorded the following Monday at the county courthouse in St. Cloud. By the spring of 1917, Anselm had moved his bride Clotilde and his infant son Reinhardt out of the rented rooms above the harness shop in Richmond and into the upstairs of the 1908 farmhouse, and by the autumn of 1917, he was milking 22 head of grade Holsteins through a 6-stanchion lean-to barn he had built himself with the help of 2 cousins from Cold Spring. The 1912 white-painted dairy barn that still stood behind the house in 1973 had been raised by Anselm and a crew of 12 neighbors over 4 days in May of 1920, and the bank wall on the north side carried Anselm's chiseled initials beside the year. In the spring of 1924, with the herd grown to 41 head and the milk going by horse-drawn cream can wagon to the creamery in Richmond, Anselm rode the Sioux Line east to Sheboygan County, Wisconsin, on the recommendation of a Sheboygan-based breeder who advertised registered Holstein Friesian bull calves in the back pages of the Horde's Dairyman magazine. He came home 11 days later in a Pullman stock car with a 5-month-old bull calf at his halter. The calf's papers folded inside an envelope in his inside coat pocket, and the calf became the foundation bull whose descendants walked the Holstein place for the next 50 years. Reinhardt grew up beside that line of bulls. By the time he was 12, he could fit a halter on a 1,900-pound mature bull without raising his voice. And by the time he was 18 and confirmed at Saints Peter and Paul, he had bred more cows by hand than most full-grown dairymen in the county. He married Brigitte Schiefelbein, a Cold Spring blacksmith's daughter, in 1944, and their son Werner was born in 1945, and their daughter Erica was born in 1949. Reinhardt took over the operation of the place from Anselm in 1951, expanded the milking string to 64 head over the next 8 years, put in the 1959 Surge bucket milker system, 1 cow at a time, and bought the 1962 Mogenier 400-gallon refrigerated bulk milk tank with cash savings. The autumn the Richmond Creamery closed, and Land O'Lakes Cooperative took over the bulk pickup route on the Sauk Lake Road. In November of 1969, his best young breeding cow, a 5-year-old registered Holstein Friesian named Gretel, out of a Holstein Line dam, and a Holstein Line sire, dropped a black and white bull calf at 3 in the morning in the south end of the stanchion barn. Reinhardt was in the calving pen with a flashlight and a clean cotton towel, and he was the first man to see the heart-shaped black patch on the calf's left flank. He named him Big Wolfgang inside 10 minutes. He fitted him with a hand-built oak halter at 15 months and walked him to the breeding stall for his first service at 20 months and never sold him. Reinhardt died on the morning of July 14th, 1973. The second cutting was on the ground in the upper hayfield, and he had been throwing wire-tied alfalfa bales up onto the deck of the 1960 New Holland 268 Baylor wagon for nearly 2 hours when Werner, who had driven out from St. Cloud that Saturday to help, looked up from the tractor seat and saw his father sit down hard against the wagon wheel and put a hand flat against his chest. The Stearns County ambulance from St. Cloud arrived in 28 minutes. Reinhardt was already gone. Brigida read the funeral notice over the kitchen telephone party line that afternoon to 17 neighbors. The solemn requiem mass at Saints Peter and Paul was on the Tuesday morning. The pallbearers were Werner, 3 Holtshoe cousins from the Cold Spring side, the Richmond co-op manager, and Edmund Wessel from over the line fence to the east. Erica wore a black knee-length wool dress over her work stockings, and she walked out of the cemetery at 1 in the afternoon, drove home in the 1968 Ford F-100, changed into the chambray shirt and the denim bib overalls and the black rubber boots, and did the 4:30 afternoon milking by herself with Brigida on the strainer and the bucket pour. Werner stayed at the place that night and the following 4 nights and helped her walk Big Wolfgang to the breeding stall for the Friday morning service on the lead cow Hilda, and then he went back to Bauer Tool Company in St. Cloud on the Monday. From the second Saturday in August of 1973, Erica ran the bull handling herself. The mockery began almost at once. Truman Hagedorn, 54 years old, the Minnesota Holstein Association regional field representative for the central Minnesota counties, telephoned from the association office in St. Paul on the second Wednesday in August, ostensibly to offer the association's condolences on Reinhardt's death and to confirm the upcoming autumn herd book registration filings. But he steered the call within 4 minutes onto the question of Big Wolfgang. Erica, you understand the realities of the modern dairy business better than I do, I'm sure, he said. But I would not be doing my job if I did not point out that an 8-year-old herd sire is a depreciating asset on a place run by a single woman of your age. The packing plant at South St. Paul is offering 41 cents a pound on mature herd sire weight this month. You would clear something north of $875. She held the receiver against her shoulder while she wrote the figure on the back of the August milk check stub. Thank you, Mr. Hagedorn, she said. I will think about it. Think hard, he said. There is no future in on-farm sires. Gunther Courtgard came up the Holtshoe Lane on a Tuesday afternoon in late August in a new 1973 Chevrolet Impala station wagon with the Minnesota Valley Breeders' Cooperative crest on the driver's side door. He was 51 years old, the manager of the Regional AI Service Center in St. Cloud, and he carried a tan leather sample case and a sheaf of mimeographed cost comparison sheets. Brigida brought him a glass of cold buttermilk at the kitchen table, and Erica sat across from him with her hands folded on the oilcloth. He unfolded the cost sheets and walked her through the standard 1973 package. A portable 14-liter LN2 Dewar tank set in the milkhouse corner, a frozen Siemens straw library of 10 to 20 sire lines, monthly visits by a field technician, $14 per service, plus a $42 per month tank rental fee. He spoke for 19 minutes without stopping. When he was finished, he tapped the heart-shaped patch on the photograph of Big Wolfgang that Brigida kept tacked above the kitchen telephone. On-farm bulls are obsolete and dangerous, Erica, he said. Every other commercial dairy of your size in this county has converted. Your grandfather's 1924 line has no genetic value against modern AI sires. The Burke Hill bloodline was retired from the registry inspections in 1961. You are running a museum, yeah. I am running a dairy, Mr. Courtgard, she said quietly. You are running a museum that will hurt you one of these mornings. Hartwell Schneider, 56 years old, the Stearns County Extension Dairy Specialist for the University of Minnesota Cooperative Extension Service, came out of the St. Cloud Extension office in mid-September on his routine autumn dairy records visit, sat in the milk house with a clipboard while Erica finished the strainer pour, and said almost the same thing in different words. He said that the conception rate data on supervised AI programs in eastern Minnesota had been climbing 5 percentage points a year for 6 years running. He said the bull handling injury statistics on the university records desk listed 2 Stearns County fatalities in 1971 and 1 in 1972. He said that he would feel personally responsible if Erica kept Big Wolfgang through the winter and was hurt in the breeding stall in the spring. It is not a question of sentiment, Erica, he said. It is a question of arithmetic. You betcha. She thanked him for his concern and walked him to his car. Edmund Wessel, 50 years old, the immediate neighbor to the east on the Sauk Lake Road, who in 1968 had sold his last on-farm herd sire to a packing plant in South Street, Paul, and converted his 84-cow Holstein operation entirely to Minnesota Valley Breeders AI service, said his piece across the woven wire line fence on a clear, cold morning in early November, when Erica was repairing a sagging staple with a fencing hammer. He leaned on the fence post and pushed his John Deere cap up off his forehead. Erica, he said, your father was a good man, and I miss him. But your father was the last man in this section who could walk a 2,140-pound bull down a barn aisle without getting himself hurt. You are not your father. You are a young single woman of 24. Sell the bull. Take the 875. Put it toward the MVB tank and the November Straw Library. I am telling you this as your neighbor and your friend. She drove the staple home and tested it with her thumb and looked up at him. Mr. Wessel, she said, I appreciate the concern. The bull stays. He shook his head and turned back toward his own barn. He did not bring it up again that autumn. The autumn went the way of all autumns on a Stearns County dairy place. The milking string ran 64 head through October and early November. The average production held at 13,800 pounds per cow per year at 3.7% butter fat. The Land O'Lakes Cooperative bulk pickup truck rolled into the yard every other day at 5:48 in the morning. Erica was up at 4:35 every morning with the kitchen stove kettle on the back burner and her boots already on. She walked the 120 feet from the back porch to the south barn door in the dark, switched on the 4 overhead barn lights, ran the first 10 cows of the milking order into the stanchions herself, fed out the morning silage with a feed cart along the manger, set up the 1959 Surge bucket milker units one at a time, and worked her way through all 64 head in 2 hours and 10 minutes. Brigida was on the strainer in the milk house from the moment the first bucket came through the milk house door, pouring through the stainless steel strainer into the 1962 Mojanier bulk tank, washing each surge unit between cows in the wash sink, and writing the morning's individual cow yields into the brown leather record book that had been on the milkhouse shelf since 1959. The named cows were the cows Reinhardt had named. Hilda was the lead cow, a 7-year-old registered Holstein Friesian who had walked first into the milking parlor every morning since 1970 and would not let any other cow precede her. Brunhilde was the heaviest milker on the place, a 6-year-old who put out 58 pounds a day in the autumn flush. Gretel was the dam of Big Wolfgang, 9 years old in 1973, and still milking 41 pounds a day. Birchin was the youngest of the named cows, a first calf heifer who had freshened in May and whose udder Brigida watched like a hawk for the first signs of mastitis. There were the other 60 cows too, of course. Erica knew everyone by ear tag number and by the shape of the white markings, and she could call up the breeding date and the freshening date and the previous lactation peak on any of them inside 10 seconds. But the 4 with the names were the cows the record book opened to first. When a cow came into heat, Erica or Brigida would mark the chalkboard above the milkhouse wash sink, and Erica would walk Big Wolfgang to the breeding stall behind the south barn that afternoon. The breeding stall itself was a heavy timbered oak structure Anselm had built in 1928, a head stanchion at one end, a side rail along the offside, a sliding gate behind, and a 6x6 oak header that carried the bull's weight when he reared up. Reinhardt had replaced 2 of the side rail timbers in 1964, but the structure was otherwise Anselm's own carpentry. Big Wolfgang walked to the stall on the hand-built oak halter on a 6-foot manila lead rope in Erica's left hand. He had never balked at the stall, had never set his feet against a halter pull, had never raised a horn in the direction of a person who had walked up to him in the daylight. He took 14 to 16 seconds in the stall on a working cow and walked back to his loose box on his own. He weighed 2,140 pounds. Erica weighed 122. She had never been afraid of him, and she did not become afraid of him in the autumn of 1973. Werner Holtschuh, 28 years old, drove out from his rented rooms in St. Cloud every Saturday afternoon, ate Brigida's supper at the kitchen table, slept in his old upstairs bedroom Saturday night, and worked the place beside Erica through Sunday daylight. The Sunday work was the heavy work, the hay mow stack shifting, the silage bunker face trimming, the manure spreader loading, the gutter cleaner chain repairs, the diesel tank top off, and the bull handling on any cow that had come into heat in the Friday or Saturday window. Werner was a tool and die machinist at the Bauer Tool Company in St. Cloud, and his weekday work paid him $41 a week, but he had not missed a Sunday on the Holtschuh place since the funeral, and Erica did not have to ask him to come. The first November frost on the Sauk Lake Road came down on the second Wednesday of the month, and the kitchen table, KSTP radio, carried the first reports of an oil embargo declared by the Arab member states of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries against the United States and other nations supporting Israel in the October War. Brigida listened to the 7 o'clock report with a wooden spoon paused above the pot of beef and barley soup and said, "Ach so, the gasoline will go up." Erica, washing her hands at the kitchen sink in the lamplight, said, "It may go up more than gasoline, Mama." By the third Wednesday of November, when President Nixon signed the Federal Fuel Allocation Rationing Program into law, and the Federal Energy Office began issuing the allocation rules for industrial diesel fuel users at 70% of pre-embargo volume, Erica was thinking about it consciously. She did not say so to Brigida or to Werner. She put a second 20-pound coffee can of cracked corn out of the Stearns County Co-op grain mill into the bull's feed bunker that Saturday, and she walked Big Wolfgang to the stall on Sunday for the morning service on Brunhilde, and she said to Werner in the milkhouse afterward, "He looks well." "He looks well," Werner agreed. The December 1973 Minnesota Valley Breeders Cooperative member newsletter came in the Rural Route mailbox on the 18th of the month. Brigida brought it in with the Catholic Digest and the Horde's Dairyman and set it on the kitchen table beside Erica's coffee mug. The newsletter ran 4 pages, mimeographed on cream-colored paper. The lead item on page 2 was a paragraph headed Supplier Side LN2 Delivery Slowdowns. The paragraph advised members that, due to ongoing energy supply constraints affecting the regional industrial gas industry, members should anticipate a possible 1-week extension of the standard 14-day tank refill cycle through the first quarter of 1974. Erica read the paragraph twice, folded the newsletter, and put it in the kitchen drawer with the milk check stubs. The Industrial Air Liquide noticed that the Minneapolis plant had reduced output to 60% of normal capacity, came as a 1-paragraph dispatch in the St. Cloud Daily Times of January 9, 1974. The Minnesota Valley Breeders Cooperative announced a 14-day backlog on member tank refills on January 14th. The backlog stretched to 21 days by January 28th, to 29 days by February 11th, and to 38 days by the 3rd week of February. Edmund Wessel's portable 14-liter MVB tank in his milkhouse corner had been on a January 18th scheduled refill that arrived on February 5th. The next scheduled refill was set for February 1st and was rescheduled to February 26th and then was not made. Wessel telephoned the Minnesota Valley Breeders Regional Service Center in St. Cloud on the morning of February 26, 1974, was told the tanker fleet was running at 4 trucks instead of 11, and that his refill could not be guaranteed before the 2nd week of March, and walked out of his milkhouse with the tank pressure gauge reading at 1/8 of full, and the residual liquid nitrogen evaporating off at the rate of a pint a day. He tried, on the advice of the Regional Service Center, to consolidate his straw inventory into the headspace of the partially emptied tank. The residual LN2 vapor in the headspace would, in theory, hold the straws at viable temperature for an extended period if the tank were not opened. He drained the warmer outer layers, set the most valuable straws of the Maple Lawn Citation Royal Sire line into the inner core, and clamped the lid. He managed to preserve approximately 22% of his straw inventory. The rest warmed past the viability threshold by March 14th. By March 28th, all 12 of the March-conceived breeding attempts on his place, performed by an MVB field technician who had driven out on March 6th with a near-empty thermos of sire straws, had failed. Wessel had no on-farm sire to fall back on. The same story ran in different versions across the 14 surrounding dairies on the Sauk Lake Road, the Cold Spring Road, the Richmond-Avon Road, the Pearl Lake Road, and the township roads running north and south of the County Trunk Highway. The Walleye Lake Dairy lost their straw inventory between March 2nd and March 8th. The Schoendorf place near Cold Spring lost theirs the 2nd week of March. The Heinmiller Dairy on the Richmond-Avon Road lost theirs March 17th. The Pribble Dairy on the Cold Spring Road held out until March 22nd before their tank ran dry, and the warming straws in the headspace lost viability over the following week. The Schweers place on the Pearl Lake Road, with the largest member tank in the county at 26 liters, fared the best. They held viable straws into the 3rd week of March, but they had already used the bulk of their most favored sire line inventory in the autumn 1973 breeding cycle. The Minnesota Valley Breeders Regional Service Center in St. Cloud closed its doors to walk-in member service on March 6, 1974, posted a notice on the front window apologizing for the unprecedented disruption of supplier-side industrial gas delivery, and reduced its field technician schedule to emergency-only calls for the duration of the disruption. The St. Cloud Daily Times carried a front-page article on March 4th estimating that the spring 1974 calf crop conception rate across the central Minnesota dairy belt would fall by between 30 and 45 percentage points relative to the spring 1973 baseline. The article quoted Hartwell Schneider at the U of M Extension office. Schneider was reported as saying, "We are looking at a structural commercial setback that may push fall 1974 freshenings back by 4 to 6 months." Edmund Wessel telephoned the Holtschuh kitchen at 7:12 in the evening on Monday, March 4th, 1974. Brigida answered the wall-mounted black rotary phone in the kitchen and called Erica in from the milk house. Erica stood in the kitchen in her boots and her bib overalls with the receiver pressed to her ear. Wessel's voice was lower than it had been at the line fence in November. "Erica," he said, "I have a 4-year-old red and white marked cow named Siggy who came into standing heat at 4 this afternoon. My tank is empty. The MVB service center is closed. I would not ask if there were another way. Would Big Wolfgang be available for outside service on her Thursday morning?" Erica looked across the kitchen at Brigida, who had stopped on her way to the sink with a dish towel in her hands. "Mr. Wessel," she said, "I will need to charge $22 cash on completion with a sit-down meal at the table when the work is finished. Walk her over Thursday at 6 in the morning." $22, he said. "Yes, 6 in the morning. Thank you, Erica." He brought Siggy up the lane at 5:50 in the morning on Thursday, March 7th, 1974, leading her on a length of cotton lead rope. The temperature on the kitchen porch thermometer read 14 degrees above zero. Wessel wore an unlined denim work jacket over a green Pendleton wool shirt and an old felt fedora rather than the John Deere cap. Erica met him at the breeding stall gate in the dawn, cold with her hair under the blue kerchief and her hands gloved against the March wind. Big Wolfgang walked out of his loose box on the oak halter at Erica's left hand and crossed the barn aisle concrete and took his place in the stall as he had taken it for the Holtschuh cows for 6 years. He turned his great head once toward the unfamiliar smell of the Wessel cow, lowered it again, and stood quietly while she was led to position. He served Siggy in 14 seconds and walked back to his loose box and lay down in the fresh straw. Wessel handed Erica a $20 bill and 2 singles at the kitchen table at 7:15 and ate Brigida's hot oatmeal with brown sugar and a half-pint glass of fresh milk and said, "I should have listened to you in November, Erica." She poured him a second mug of coffee and did not answer. Word ran out from the Wessel kitchen the same afternoon. By the following Monday, March 11th, the Walleye Lake Dairy had telephoned to ask about a cow named Stella for the Wednesday morning. By Wednesday, the Schoendorf place had sent word by their hired man that they had 3 cows in standing heat, and would Erica consider Saturday. By March 18th, the Heinmiller Dairy on the Richmond-Avon Road had walked 2 cows the 4 miles over to the Holtschuh Lane and asked if there were a place in the south barn to bed them down for the night ahead of an early morning service. By March 21st, the Preibel place on the Cold Spring Road and the Schweers place on the Pearl Lake Road had both telephoned. By March 25th, the Eichten Dairy on the Southern Township line had brought over a 4-year-old Holstein Friesian named Gretty, and the next morning the Lemke place south of Cold Spring brought their lead cow, Trudy. The kitchen telephone rang 3 to 5 times an afternoon through the last week of March, and Brigida took the messages in pencil on the back of envelopes and clipped them to a nail above the wall set. Erica built out the working schedule on a separate sheet of butcher paper tacked above the milkhouse wash sink, 1 row per outside dairy and 1 column per morning, and she did not double book a morning. The outside cows arrived at the head of the Holtschuh Lane the evening before the scheduled service, were bedded down in the 2 loose boxes at the south end of the stanchion barn, were watered from the freeze-proof barn hydrant Anselm had installed in 1937, and were brought to the breeding stall at 6 in the morning. Erica walked Big Wolfgang from his loose box to the stall on the oak halter. The cow was led to position by her owner. The bull served her in 14 to 16 seconds, and the cow was walked back to her loose box. The owner sat down at the kitchen table at 7:15 with Erica and Brigida, ate hot oatmeal or fried eggs and side pork and Brigida's brown bread toast, and drank a half pint of fresh milk, and counted $22 in cash onto the oilcloth before he walked his cow home up the road. The brown leather record book on the milkhouse shelf, the same book Brigida had kept the Holtschuh herd book registrations in since 1959, gained a new section in Erica's careful upright hand on the first inside page of the back half. She titled the section Outside Bull Service Account, 1974. Each entry ran a single line: date, time, dairy of origin, cow name or ear tag number, fee paid. The first entry, March 7th, 1974, read Wessel Place, Cow Siggy, $22 cash. The 41st entry, on April 22nd, 1974, read Walleye Lake Dairy, Cow Trudy, $22 cash. Total outside service receipts for the 11-week window of January through April. 1974 came to $902 in cash. Every bill of it counted and stacked into the green metal cash box on the upper shelf of the kitchen pantry. Through the same 11-week window, the Holtschuh herd ran on its own normal breeding cycle in parallel. Of the 64 Holtschuh cows on the place, 6 were dry or in poor condition or in the early lactation milk fever recovery window, and were skipped from the spring breeding cycle. The remaining 58 were bred to Big Wolfgang in the standard chalkboard heat detection order between January 8th, 1974, and April 22nd, 1974. Hilda, the lead cow, was bred on January 11th and conceived on first service. Brunhilde was bred on January 17th and conceived on first service. Gretel, Big Wolfgang's own dam, was bred on February 4th and conceived on first service, an entry Erica underlined in pencil in the brown leather record book, with a small, careful note in the margin, reading simply, "The line continues." Birchen, the first calf heifer, was bred on March 22nd and conceived on first service. By the second week of April, 1974, the running tally in the brown leather record book showed the heat check conception rate on the Holtschuh herd at 94% on first service. The 41 outside cows from the 14 surrounding dairies ran at 88% first service conception. Both rates ran substantially higher than the 67% first service conception rate Minnesota Valley breeders had reported on the previous spring's AI program. Werner drove out from St. Cloud every Saturday afternoon of that 11-week window and stayed through Sunday evening. He took a Friday off from the Bauer Tool Company on March 22, 1974, when the working schedule on the butcher paper had stacked 4 outside services and 3 Holtschuh services into the Saturday morning, and Erica needed a second pair of hands at the breeding stall gate. He walked Big Wolfgang for the heavy weekend service days, and he repaired the sliding gate at the breeding stall back end the second weekend in March, when a Heinmiller cow had set her hip against it and sprung the latch. He greased the milk pump bearings, tightened the gutter cleaner chain, and helped Brigida lift 200-pound sacks of cracked corn from the truck bed into the feed room. On the evening of Sunday, March 31st, 1974, the two of them sat at the kitchen table with the record book open between them and the green cash box on the oilcloth, and counted the March receipts. The cash for the month came to $418. Werner said, "He has paid for his hay through the spring, and then some." Erica said, "He has paid for his hay through 1976, if I am careful with it." Brigitte brought a fresh pot of coffee. Big Wolfgang was already asleep in his loose box. The spring breeding window closed in the third week of April, 1974. The last Holstein cow on the spring cycle, an 8-year-old named Liesel, was bred on April 20th and conceived on first service. The last outside cow walked over from the Walleye Lake Dairy on April 22nd and was served the same morning. By the closing date, the Holstein herd was fully bred on schedule for a normal 1975 calf crop, and the 41 outside cows had been bred in time for an only modestly delayed summer. 1975 freshening on their respective places. By the same closing date, Minnesota Valley Breeders Cooperative had restored partial tanker service to the central Minnesota counties. The Industrial Air Liquide Minneapolis plant had come back to 75% capacity in the second week of April, and the diesel allocations had been adjusted upward in the federal program. But the spring 1974 breeding window for the eastern half of the state had been substantially missed. Across the surrounding dairies that had relied entirely on AI, the spring conception rate ran below 30%. The fall 1974 freshening curve was pushed back, on average, by 4.5 months. Edmund Wessel came up the Holtschuh Lane on the morning of Saturday, April 27, 1974, on foot, his John Deere cap held in his right hand at his side, his work boots polished. He stopped at the front porch steps and waited until Erica came out the kitchen door, drying her hands on the bib of her overalls. She had been at the morning milking since 4:35, and the buttermilk smell of the milk house was still on her sleeves. "Erica," he said. He did not move from the second step. "I have come to ask if you would consider selling me a registered Holtschuh line bull calf at your next available opportunity. I will pay your asking price. I will sign whatever the Minnesota Holstein Association requires. I would like to come back to an on-farm sire on my place. I do not want to be where I was this past March." She rested one hand on the porch railing. "Mr. Wessel," she said, "you will be on the list. I will hold the first bull calf of the 1975 spring crop for you. The price will run somewhere between $480 and $640, depending on the dam and the conformation. I will let you know in February." "Thank you, Erica," he said. He put his cap back on and walked down the lane. He did not look back. By the autumn of 1974, 4 Stearns County dairies had paid down deposits on Holtschuh line bull calves out of the spring 1975 calf crop. The Wessel place paid $510 for the first calf, sired by Big Wolfgang out of the cow Brunhild, on August 14, 1974, with delivery scheduled for weaning in October 1975. The Schondorf place paid $480 for a calf out of a Holtschuh cow named Ilse. The Heinmiller place paid $640 for the highest conformation calf in the crop, sired by Big Wolfgang out of Hilda herself. The Walleye Lake Dairy paid $570. Each deposit was paid in cash at the Holtschuh kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon, and was entered in the brown leather record book under a new section titled Holtschuh Line Bull Calf Deposits, 1974. Brigida countersigned each entry as witness. The 4 deposits together came to $2,200 in cash, and Erica carried the bundle to the German-American State Bank in Richmond on the morning of August 19th and opened a separate savings account in the name of the Holtschuh place. The Stearns County Co-op grain mill in Richmond, which had supplied the Holtschuh place with cracked corn since the late 1940s, raised its price on the ton in September of 1974, citing the same federal fuel allocation rules that had hit the LN2 industry 6 months earlier. Erica paid the new rate without complaint and added a second monthly delivery for the bull and for the 4 bull calves she would carry through the winter. The mill manager, a man named Lemberger, who had known Reinhardt since the 1950s, hand-loaded the additional bags onto the Holtschuh truck bed himself the first week of September and said, "Your father would be proud of how the place has come through the year, Erica." She thanked him and paid in cash from the green box. Hartwell Schneider sent Erica a written letter from the U of M Cooperative Extension Office in St. Cloud on October 8, 1974. The letter ran 2 typed pages on University of Minnesota letterhead. He apologized, in the careful, formal cadence of a man who had said the wrong thing in September of 1973 and had been thinking about it since the previous spring, for his earlier dismissal of the Holtschuh Herdsire line. He asked permission to formally document the line for inclusion in the Minnesota Holstein Conservation Registry, a state-level program for the preservation of historically significant in-state dairy bloodlines, and he requested an on-site visit at her convenience to photograph Big Wolfgang and to copy the herd book records back through Anselm's 1924 Wisconsin import. Erica wrote back on November 1st in pencil on lined paper, agreed to the visit, and proposed a Saturday in mid-November when Werner could be present. Schneider drove out from St. Cloud on November 16, 1974, with a young extension assistant and a Polaroid land camera, spent 4 hours in the South Barn and the milk house with Brigida's brown leather record book open across the wash sink counter, photographed Big Wolfgang in his loose box and at the breeding stall gate, and shook Erica's hand at the kitchen door. The Conservation Registry filing was completed in January of 1975. Truman Hagedorn telephoned Erica on the Monday after the new year of 1975 to confirm a Minnesota Holstein Association inspection visit for the spring registration cycle. He arrived on the Holtschuh place on a clear, cold morning in late March 1975 with a Holstein Association judging clipboard and an assistant, walked the milking string, inspected the breeding stall and the loose box arrangement, paged through the brown leather record book at the kitchen table, and signed off on a master breeder registration for the Holtschuh place on the spot. He stood in the yard with his clipboard under his arm and his felt hat pushed back and said, "Erica, I was wrong about you in August of 1973, and I want it on the record." "Mr. Hagedorn," she said. "It is on the record." He nodded once and walked to his car. The master breeder certificate arrived in the Rural Route mailbox the second week of April 1975. Brigida framed it in a varnished oak frame from the Coast to Coast Hardware in Richmond and hung it on the kitchen wall above the wood stove between the photograph of Anselm at the 1916 deed signing and the photograph of Reinhardt in his confirmation suit. The certificate hung in that place for the next 49 years and is still hanging there as of the most recent published Stearns County Dairy Herd Registry. Through the spring and summer of 1975, word continued to travel. By the autumn, 6 more Stearns County dairies had inquired about Holtschuh line bull calves, and 3 of them had placed deposits on the spring 1976 calf crop. Gunther Courtguard at the Minnesota Valley Breeders Regional Service Center in St. Cloud did not call. He saw Erica at the Stearns County Fair in early August of 1975 in the Holstein judging ring and tipped his hat to her and walked on. He retired from the cooperative in 1978. Edmund Wessel maintained an on-farm Holtshoe line bull from the autumn of 1975 until his retirement from dairying in 1989. By the time of the 1980 Stearns County Dairy Census, 14 commercial dairies in the county were maintaining on-farm herd sires as a fallback to AI. Every one of them out of the Holtshoe line, every one of them traceable in the brown leather record book to Anselm's 1924 Sheboygan import. The Minnesota Valley Breeders Cooperative itself, after the lessons of the winter and spring of 1973 to 74, restructured its supplier contracts in 1976 to include redundant LN2 supply from a second industrial gas supplier in Iowa and built additional reserve capacity tanks at the St. Cloud Regional Service Center. The cooperative also began to publicly recommend, in its quarterly newsletter from the spring of 1977 forward, that member dairies of a certain herd size maintain a registered on-farm fallback sire of demonstrated regional bloodline as a contingency against supply disruptions. Erica continued to operate the dairy with Werner's weekend help through the late 1970s. The milking string stayed at 64 head. The production rose to 14,400 pounds per cow per year. By 1978, the butterfat held at 3.7%, and the Land O'Lakes truck continued to roll into the yard every other day at 5:48 in the morning. In the summer of 1980, Erica met Rudy Hoffmeyer, a 33-year-old St. Cloud High School agricultural arts teacher and the son of an Albany, Minnesota hardware merchant, at a Stearns County Holstein Association picnic at Pearl Lake. He was a quiet, thoughtful man who had grown up on a small dairy himself outside Albany and had taught vocational agriculture at the St. Cloud Tech High School since 1969. He drove out to the Holtshoe place on Saturday afternoons through the autumn of 1980 and the winter of 1981 and walked the milking string with her and learned the named cows by their markings. They were married at Saints Peter and Paul in Richmond on a clear, cool Saturday in June of 1981. Brigida cooked for 40 at the kitchen table and the back porch. Werner stood as the witness. Father Marceline Klinkhammer, the parish priest who had buried Reinhardt 8 years earlier, said the wedding mass. They raised 3 children in the upstairs of the 1908 farmhouse. The first, a boy, was born in March of 1982 and was named Reinhardt after his grandfather. The second, a girl, was born in November of 1984 and was named Clotilde after her great-grandmother. The third, a boy, was born in the spring of 1987 and was named Anselm after his great-great-grandfather. The 3 of them grew up walking the milking string, knew the named cows by their markings before they could read, and learned to fit a halter on a yearling bull at the age Reinhardt had learned it. Werner continued his weekend partnership on the place through the 1980s and the 1990s and never married. He took early retirement from the Bauer Tool Company in 1995 at the age of 50 and moved out to the Holtshoe place full-time, took over the heavy field work and the bull handling rotation, and lived in the small carriage house apartment Anselm had built in 1932 until his peaceful death of a stroke in the spring of 2014 at the age of 69. Big Wolfgang himself worked the Holtshoe breeding stall through the spring breeding cycle of 1979, by which time he was 14 years old and had sired an estimated 1,420 calves across the Stearns County dairy belt. 690 of them on the Holtschuh place, and the balance on outside cows from the spreading network of dairies that had brought their cows to the Holtschuh lane since the spring of 1974. He walked to the stall on the oak halter at the left hand of Erica, or of Werner. He took his 14 to 16 seconds in the stall and walked back to his loose box and lay down in the fresh straw. He never set a foot wrong on a person in 14 years of service. He had grown gentler with age and a little stiff in the offside hind leg. Erica retired him from breeding work on the morning of October 4th, 1979, after his last service on a Holtschuh cow named Sieglinde. She turned him out to a private 4-acre pasture south of the milk house that had been Reinhardt's saddle horse pasture in years past, where the spring-fed creek ran along the woven wire west fence line. He spent his retirement there in the company of 2 retired Holtschuh cows and a barn cat named Pretzel. He died of old age in his pasture on the morning of October 14th, 1981, 3 months past his 16th birthday, and Werner buried him with the backhoe on the hill above the creek where the cottonwood stood. Erica sat on the bank for an hour after the grave was filled. The hand-built oak halter Reinhardt had fitted on him in 1966 came back to the kitchen wall and hangs there still beside the master breeder certificate. The Holtschuh herd sire line, traceable in the brown leather record book through every entry of the past 60 years to Anselm's 1924 Wisconsin import out of Burke Hill Inca Pride Royal, has continued unbroken into the present. After Big Wolfgang's retirement, the working sire on the place was a son of his named Big Wolfgang II, born November 1976 out of the Holtschuh cow Brunhilde, who worked the stall through 1985. After Big Wolfgang II came his son Wolfgang III, who worked through 1993. After Wolfgang III came Wolfgang IV, and after Wolfgang IV came Wolfgang V, and the line has continued by name through the present day. Erica ran the place as managing operator until the autumn of 2018, when she handed the day-to-day management to her nephew Albrecht Holtschuh, Werner's son by a brief marriage in his mid-30s that had not lasted. A son Werner had raised mostly on the Holtschuh place after his ex-wife's move to the Twin Cities in 1989. Albrecht had grown up walking the milking string at his cousin Reinhardt the Younger's side and had taken over the bull handling at the age of 26. He is 46 years old as of the present writing, and the place is still milking 82 registered Holstein Friesian cows through the same 1912 white-painted dairy barn on a modernized milking system installed in 2003 with an on-farm working bull, a great-great-great-grandson of Big Wolfgang, named by the current generation of Holtschuh children simply Wolfie. The herd book registrations have run unbroken in the Minnesota Holstein Conservation Registry since the original 1975 Schneider documentation. Rudy Hoffmeyer proved over the long years on the place to be the kind of quiet partner the Holtschuh women had hoped he would be. He never tried to put himself between Erica and the herd. He took on the orchard work, the spring pruning of the dozen wealthy and Haralson apple trees Anselm had planted along the south windbreak in 1922, the August picking, the autumn pressing on the hand-cranked cider press in the carriage house. And he took on the high school agricultural arts class field trips that came out to the Holtschuh place every May through the 1980s and 1990s to walk the milking string and to study a working bull from a respectful distance behind the breeding stall rail. He kept his teaching salary at St. Cloud Tech in a separate account and used it for the children's school expenses and for the household clothing. Erica kept the dairy receipts in the Holstein account at the German-American State Bank in Richmond and never commingled the two. They did not believe in debt, and they did not carry any. Brigitte Holtschuh lived in the upstairs of the 1908 farmhouse until the autumn of 2001. She kept the laying hen flock and the canning kitchen and the brown leather record book until the spring of 1997, when at the age of 75 she turned the record-keeping over to Erica's daughter, Clotilde, then a 13-year-old who had been writing in the book under her grandmother's supervision since the age of 9. Brigitte died peacefully in her bed in the upstairs of the farmhouse on October 22, 2001, at the age of 79. She is buried in the parish cemetery of Saints Peter and Paul beside Reinhardt, and beside Anselm, and beside Clotilde I. Rudi Hoffmeyer retired from St. Cloud Technical High School in the spring of 2007 after 38 years of teaching agricultural arts and joined Erica and Werner on the place full-time. He took on the gardening and the orchard and the kitchen end of the canning work that Brigitte had run. He is alive as of the present writing, 78 years old, and still rises with Erica at 4:35 every morning. The four mockers are all gone now. Truman Hagedorn died of cancer in St. Paul in 1991 at the age of 72. The master breeder certificate he signed on the Holtschuh place in March of 1975 hangs in the office of his successor at the Minnesota Holstein Association as an example of the kind of judgment he came around to in his late career. Gunther Courtgard died of heart failure on Pearl Lake in 1996. Hartwell Schneider lived in retirement in St. Cloud until his death in 2008 at the age of 91. The formal conservation registry documentation he prepared in November of 1974 is filed in the archives of the University of Minnesota Department of Animal Science and is still consulted by dairy history researchers. Edmund Wessel passed in his sleep in 2003. His son sold the home 84-acre Wessel Place in 2009. Erica Holtschuh Hoffmeyer is alive as of the present writing. She is 75 years old. She rises at 4:35 every morning, walks the 120 feet from the back porch to the south barn door in the dark, switches on the overhead barn lights, and runs the first cows of the milking order into the stanchions herself. Her daughter Clotilde works the milk house. Her nephew Albrecht walks the working bull Wolfie to the breeding stall when a cow comes in standing heat. The Land O'Lakes cooperative bulk pickup truck still stops every other day at 5:48 in the morning. The brown leather record book sits open on the wash sink counter. The hand-built oak halter Reinhardt fitted on Big Wolfgang in 1966 still hangs on the kitchen wall beside the master breeder certificate. On the kitchen counter beside the wood stove, there sits a small framed black and white photograph. Hartwell Schneider's young assistant took on the morning of November 16, 1974. Big Wolfgang in his loose box, the heart-shaped black patch on his left flank in full view, and Erica at his shoulder in the chambray shirt and the bib overalls and the blue cotton kerchief, 25 years old, one hand resting on his neck. She looks calm in the photograph. She looks the way she has always looked. If you have ever known an average farmer who did the work nobody noticed until it mattered, leave a comment below telling us about her. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe and ring the bell. There is an average farmer in every county in America. We are telling their stories one season at a time.